Hey there, this is Natalie, and here we are for day 3 of chapter 1 of Higurashi When They Cry. Now, as I said in my last 2 videos in this series, I did already play through days 1 and 2, and part of day 3, when I first got the game, was having some technical problems and couldn't get it to record, so when I made the videos of those 2 days, I had already seen everything that was in them. This one, I've seen the first part, which we'll be looking at now. But after that, we'll be going into completely new territory for me. So we'll be seeing if there's anything interesting towards the end of this day. But the day starts with them already at school. This must be the day after the end of day 2. So it seems that Keiichi and Rena are telling Mion all about the Kenta-kun, Colonel Sanders statue that they found at the garbage disposal site. Mion doesn't really understand why anyone would think that the four-eyed geezer that is Colonel Sanders would be cute and want to take him home. But we've already learned just how kind of quirky Rena is. Keiichi says that it's better to hear it from her because he doesn't really get it either. Rika has appeared now too. Keiichi doesn't really approve of a girl her age rummaging around in garbage, but Rika says that if Rena enjoys it, then she thinks it's fine. But now, of course, he wants to know more about the construction site, and here we're going to hear what the story was with that place. Rika-chan says that everyone gathered together and fought against it. Keiichi points out that hearing an ominous word like fought come from Rika-chan's mouth startled him. But now Mion picks up the story. She says that they said Hinamizawa would be sunk into the reservoir and they had no say in the matter. Now Satoko's appeared. She's saying it took a while to powder her nose. And Keiichi tries to freak her out by saying something vulgar about how she should wait to use the can until she really has to go because it's a lot easier since it shoots right out. She says, "How dare you speak that way to a maiden of unparalleled beauty such as myself." So we're back to the bickering between Satoko and Keiichi, and it even says on screen the usual hijinks ensued. So it looks like we're not going to be hearing any more about the dam construction site and how the village managed to fight off the project yet. Because Mion has an announcement to make, and that is that it's time for Kenichi's initiation into their game playing club. She asks if any of the girls in the group have an objection to him joining. None of them do, but of course he has to win the game, or at least play up to their standards to be allowed to join. Yeah, Mion says, "A unanimous decision. Congratulations, Keiichi Mibara-kun. I present you the honour of being allowed to take the entrance exam for our club." Keiichi protests that he didn't say he would join and doesn't even know what club she's talking about. What our club does, you see, in order to cope with our complicated society, we perform various activities under different sets of rules. Now, that's a pretty elaborate way of saying that they play games. I don't know if that's just Mion's particular way of talking where she's just sort of messing around, or whether there's something to this. In order to cope with our complicated society, we perform various activities under different sets of rules. Sometimes they're in your favour, and sometimes they work against you. Are they playing these kind of games to train themselves for something because they're perhaps aware of the complicated society they live in? I mean, you wouldn't think a little village like Hinamizawa would be a particularly complicated society. The law of the jungle is survival of the fittest, Satoko says. This was starting to sound a bit sketchy. But Rika says that to sum it up, it's a club where we play games together. We already learned on day one that Mion's hobby is collecting games from all over the world, and she's hoarded some, and they play them every day. It seemed that depending on the day, there were prizes for the winner or a penalty for the person who finished in last place. I'll make this clear right now, we aren't playing house here. You should treat each win or loss as if your life depends on it, alright? It almost does sound like they're kind of training for something in their own way. What's wrong with just having fun? Don't make it sound so crazy, Keiichi says. The first rule of our society, aim only for first place. Going at it half-assed just because it's a game is not allowed. So he's taken it all as meaning that they should try to win using any means necessary, that this game-playing club isn't necessarily all about sticking to the rules, and they only want members of their club who will take winning seriously. Rika-chan says, of course, I will do my best too. Rena says, I'm pretty weak, but I'm trying my best. We've already seen a couple of times that she's not physically weak. I knew what they were trying to say. In a game where everybody is aiming for the top, it's rather unsportsmanlike to play just for fun. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that does make sense as a way to have a game or play sports together, that, you know, if everybody's not playing it seriously, then if you're the one person that's just messing around, it's not sportsmanlike. But I feel like, again, it's a case of like knowing the genre of this visual novel. I feel like I want there to be more to this scene than them just playing a card game and trying to outwit each other, you know? Why are these kids so interested in this like Law of the Jungle style of playing board games and card games? A word of warning, Kei-chan. Rena can get pretty nasty. So it seems that Mion keeps her collection of games, or at least the ones that they play at school, in a locker in the classroom instead of at her house. It seems that their school recognises what they do as a club activity, so she can keep the club equipment there. Complicated games would put Kei-chan at a disadvantage, so today we'll play a game that you should be familiar with. How about a standard card game? Like Old Bachelor. I've never heard of Old Bachelor. And now they decide what the penalty will be for the person who finishes last. This time the loser will be sentenced to having their face drawn on. What do you think? And they kind of argue about whether or not it will be with oil-based paint. I guess that's harder to get off. Satoko didn't even flinch at the thought of such a severe penalty. So she seems pretty sure that she's not going to lose. Keiichi's, if it's going to be like this, then I can't lose either. We've already seen that he can get pretty competitive, particularly with Satoko. At least we get an explanation of the game here, because I'd never heard of it before. Old Bachelor is pretty much the same as Old Maid. There's only one difference, there's no joker. In its place, one card is pulled out at the start, meaning there will be one card without a match left over at the end. You don't know which card will end up being the joker. It's a pretty thrilling game. I tell you what, guys, I've already read this part of the visual novel, and I think thrilling would be exaggerating the level of excitement we're going to be seeing just a little bit. But it is quite interesting to see how these kids play this game, because they definitely are not in any way concerned with the rules, and so it kind of becomes a psychological battle of a different nature between them all. So first of all, Rena takes out a card and leaves it face down on the table. Everybody stared at the card intently. Well, it'll be pretty obvious in the end game, but there's no way to tell at the start. But the rest of them were very serious. Now basically, it transpires that these girls are so familiar with this deck of cards that they've memorized the little markings on the back of the cards. you know, how many scratches there are on them, which ones are worn in which places. And they know how to identify every single card in that deck. Keiichi says, this deck is pretty worn out. No way. Can everyone tell by the scratches what the card on the table is? Satoko reminds him that the second rule of their society is that he must try his hardest to win as well. But of course, he's never played with this deck of cards before, and he's just found out that he's basically at an impossible handicap here. Rena tells him that a number of the cards are quite unique, and he should be able to remember them pretty quickly. She says this so matter-of-factly that it's clearly no big deal to her or to the rest of them that this is how they play. It's no longer really a card game, it's more a kind of memory game. But against Keiichi, who doesn't know the cards, it's going to become more of a game of tricking each other. It was rather obvious I was at a disadvantage. After all, they'd gone so far as to memorize the wear and tear for each individual card. This wasn't a simple game of Old Bachelor. If this was a test, then they were playing with the answer sheet in front of them. Bring it. Keiichi is still determined to take advantage of their carelessness and beat them at their own game. But Mion quickly stamps on his confidence by immediately identifying the cards in his hand, just from seeing the back of them. So that proves that they really are this good at identifying the cards in this particular deck. Rika-chan now appears and identifies which one the bachelor is. She says it's the Jack of Diamonds. It's interesting to see how sweet little Rika's just as into this as the rest of them. So they do all take this game pretty seriously, even though they're all cheating. They're all, even the ones you might expect to show a little bit of sympathy to Keiichi-kun, Rena and Rika-chan, are still happily trying to defeat him, using their knowledge of the deck of cards. But Rena's the first to go out. These club activities weren't to be trifled with. In day 2, he said that a couple of times about the village. An alumnus of this club would definitely survive in the cruelest of situations. Again, do you think that means that they're doing this to kind of train for something? If our entire class had self-detonating collars strapped to their necks and were dropped into a death match on a deserted island, these guys would probably take to it like a fish to water. He's kind of saying if they were in the battle royale kind of situation, they would love it. They'd be like those pros in the Hunger Games. Mion explains the point system, how they're going to determine which of them is going to end up having their face drawn on. Keiichi finished last in their game of Old Bachelor. Rika is taking score. Rena suggests that it might be unfair to Keiichi-kun if they don't use a new deck. But Mion says it's fine because Kei-chan is a man after all. He can turn the tables even if the odds are stacked against him, right? She's kind of egging him on to proclaim that yes, he's a man and he can do that. Satoko says a typical Satoko line. It's fitting for a lowly peasant to scamper home and soak their pillow in tears, don't you think? A petite hand laid itself on top of my head, which was trembling from uncontainable frustration. It was Rika-chan's. She'd given him the head pats. Keep on fighting. Thanks to Rika-chan's words of encouragement, he was able to calm down. You need to be calm, especially when you're cornered. We've seen Rika do this thing of patting people on the head before to comfort them. In this case, she's doing it to encourage him to keep going in what seems like an unwinnable situation. And it does actually help him calm down. That's the power I could muster during this crisis. Do you think we're going to see him in a real crisis? And Rika's going to be able to do the same thing by way of calming him down and keeping him motivated to keep surviving. Now he decides to meditate on each card, basically, and try and memorize the ones he can. Think about what you can do in this situation. Try everything in your power to improve your chances of victory. So by staying calm and trying to think of a strategy and using his brain, he does manage to learn a few of the cards. Rika says the one with the ripped corner should be the 5. And that puts her out of the game. I couldn't let any of those precious hints slip by me. All information is a weapon. I think so too, Keiichi. That's why I'm trying to overanalyze everything you kids are saying. Then it was my turn. Satoko found out her cards for me. You see, I want the 7. Is it this one? I wonder about that. You won't know unless you take it. There was a bit of dismay in her expression. He's now trying to read Satoko's reaction to see whether or not she wants the card taken. He decides that her expression suggests that she doesn't want him to take the card. Now he's successful in beating Satoko with that approach, and she says, "What is this? The 7 should be the hardest one of all to tell apart." And he says it wasn't from memorizing the markings. Those slight changes in their expressions as I was selecting a card were enough. So he's now looking for tells on these girls. If that's an essential part of doing well in this game, being able to read people and look for tells in the way that they act, is it maybe that's why they play these games in the first place and make them so difficult? Because they're trying to improve those skills in themselves and their friends, because they are going to be put into some crueler situation and they know about it. They know it's coming, and so they're trying to use these things that look like school games to train themselves. I don't know, like the kids in the Promised Neverland where they train the younger kids using games. Maybe it's something like that. That would mean that whatever's going on here, whatever these kids are going to face in this story, Mion, if she's the one responsible for them playing these games, would have to know about it. I don't know, probably still a bit early for me to be making those kind of theories. I feel like there has to be a lot to this scene, because it does go on for quite a long time and it is quite eventful, but it just seems like it's still one of those let's just get to know the characters and how they get along with each other kind of scenes. But it could be also full of clues. Clues to what? I still don't know. But now we see that Mion gets a card wrong. She thinks it's the 2 of diamonds based on the mark on it. She was startled by her own misread. Of course, everyone else was too. It's rare that Mi-chan gets a card wrong. But Keiichi's been a sneaky sneak and made an extra marking on the card. He put an extra nail scratch on the card, and that's what threw Mion off. Satoko has to admit that this is an impressive show of wit. He's fully on board with the cheating now. Keiichi landed a clean hit, says Rika. And she claps for him. Having defeated the Forerunner, Mion, my brilliant battle left me ecstatic. He's overcome the fact that the odds were completely stacked against him using his wits. He's feeling good. But by total points, it was already set in stone that Mion would win and he would finish last. But now he decides to try and bait Mion into making a bet with him about the final outcome. He laughs haughtily, selecting the tone of his voice carefully to get on Mion's nerves. He already knows how to bait these other girls into doing things. He knows that certain approaches will get the reaction he wants out of them. And Mion rises to the bait and suggests they have a duel. One chance. If you win, then we'll swap first and last place. How about it? And this is just what he was hoping she would do. A chance for an upset that wouldn't be possible without goading her into it. So now they're playing by different rules. Mion discarded 2 cards from her hand and replaced one with the Joker card that was on the table, then shuffled the resulting hand behind her back. The card in my right or the card in my left. If Kei-chan can guess which hand the Joker's in, then he wins. When you turned around just now, you didn't pull out the Joker, did you? If you lose, I'll show the card in the other hand. The other 3 gulped nervously at this unexpected turn of events. So, Mion's now holding up the cards, one in each hand, and Keiichi's trying to inspect them to figure out which one's the Joker. The card on the right had no distinguishing marks. I couldn't tell which one it was. Looking closely at the card on the left, he saw a little wear. It wasn't one he'd seen before. Satoko has a little outburst here and says, that card is... But stops herself. Mion clucked her tongue. He didn't recognize the mark on the left card from the small number that he'd memorized. He didn't know what the left card was, but he could already tell from Satoko's reaction that the card had appeared during the game. Since it had already appeared before, it meant that it definitely wasn't the Joker. But now Mion is going to try and call his bluff. Kei-chan thinks it's the one on the right. Will you choose that one then? The left card definitely wasn't the Joker. If I could trust that theory, then I should have been able to declare that that card to the right was the Joker. Even without Mion's taunting, the one on the right was the most suspicious. But wasn't it a bit too rash to decide based solely on Satoko's reaction? But now he thinks more carefully and he figures out that the left card is the 7 of clubs. He says out loud, it's the 7 of clubs, I see. Thinking to himself that he's won. The card on the left was the 7 of clubs. But there's more to it than that, guys. The card on the right was the Joker. But just as he reaches out to touch the card, he has another idea. And he thinks to himself that what's actually happened is the 7 of clubs has been used to sit in front of the Joker to disguise the back of the Joker card. Satoko tries to lure him into picking the left one again. Rika plays along with her. What makes you so certain that the right one isn't the Joker, Kei-chan? Mion let loose an unexpected question. Everyone else was baffled. I don't know what the card on the right could be, but I know that the one on the left is the 7 of clubs. Satoko says, then, doesn't that leave the right one as the Joker? One of them has to be the Joker, right? Rika says Keiichi has good intuition. Rena is confused by this. She says, Rika-chan, what do you mean by that? So basically, the 7 of clubs, I discarded that by matching it with Satoko's 7 of spades earlier. Everyone's attention snapped to the discard pile at the same time. The truth of the matter couldn't be discerned from that sloppy pile. So that means Mion pocketed one of the discarded cards, then aligned it over the left card, and that means Rena figures out what he's saying. The left card is being disguised as the 7 of clubs, right? It was the first time since the start of the match that a shadow ran across Mion's expression, and I didn't let that slip by. Then, with a grand flourish, he declared it loudly. The Joker is the left one. It was an intense moment. That 1 second felt like an eternity for everyone there. The first one to speak was Mion. Being the first president of this club, I've been witness to a variety of performances. Kei-chan, yours is the best. The best of the best of the best. She's really enjoyed that game. But there is still a twist to come. Mion accepted her defeat, dropping the cards from both of her hands. Keiichi thinks he's celebrating his comeback victory. Rika-chan placed her hand on his head and began petting it, congratulating him on his victory. But that's not really what she's doing. The other girls who know Rika-chan better are surprised to see Rika petting his head that way. And that's because she only pets you on the head when you lose. And Keiichi realizes that actually he did lose the game. Despite figuring out certain steps of Mion's plan, she was still one step ahead of him. She predicted that he would figure this out, and the Joker was the right card all along. You know, Kei-chan, I thought you'd read into it that far. It was a gamble. If you'd just jumped to conclusions like a little brat, then I would have lost. Mion picked up the card from the losing hand. Kei-chan, you know you should take pride in this loss. She turned it around. It was a setup behind a setup. If I'd just picked the right one without reading so deeply into it. But Mion is so happy with how the game went that she's invited him into the club. He's still lost though, so he's going to have his face painted with oil-based paint. But now Rena reveals that both she and Satoko already knew that Mion was playing this trick. Oh, and Rika too. She says he fell for it quite handily. So when Satoko was reacting during the card game, she was actually in on what Mion was doing. All of them knew from the start and still got excited so earnestly. Everyone got excited to make it more fun, Rika says. You're all demons, you monsters. Are they? Are they going to be demons and monsters? That'd be cool. So the other three hold down his arms and shoulders firmly, and Mion uses an oil-based felt tip marker. While they all hold him down, she draws on his face. I let out my death throes. And that is the end of this scene. And this is as far as I've played, so I don't know what's going to happen next, whether we get another scene from this day after they leave school. Okay, so as soon as the club activities were finished, Rena left. Keiichi assumes she's gone off to visit the Colonel Sanders again, and so today it's just him and Mion walking home. And now Keiichi's finally going to ask Mion about the murder by dismemberment that seemed to have happened at the dam. Over there, you know, at the dam construction site. Did something happen there? But Mion just goes on to tell him about the demonstrations and protests that the people of the village made against the dam construction. It was a bit different from what I wanted to hear, but I decided I'd listen just the same. It was our land that was going to be sunk into the dam reservoir. I would have thought as well, probably. If this was 4 years ago, she would probably remember it pretty well. But she would have been too young to be, I guess, involved in the protests and things. The government guys were really adamant about it. Since they figured out that they couldn't settle it with money, they did a bunch of nasty stuff. So I guess they offered the people of the village money to move somewhere else. They weren't happy with that. Mion spoke excitedly as if the whole thing was happening in front of her. The mayor and prominent figures in the village all signed petitions. They went to Tokyo and struck deals with legislators. As a result, the development plan was retracted. That just doesn't seem like something that would happen. It seems odd that if these government guys were using shady tactics and things, that some people from a small village would be able to win something like that just by going up to Tokyo with some petitions and striking deals with legislators. What kind of deals? Did they agree to let something happen in their village in order for them to keep their homes? It doesn't seem like just by complaining, people in this kind of situation don't usually get what they want just by protesting. What kind of deal did they strike? There wasn't any violence, was there? Like assaults or murders? None. She promptly cut me off, the same as Rena had. Now, unlike when Rena acted weirdly when he asked her about it, the scene hasn't changed in the same way. The music's still playing, Mion's sprite is still smiling, but he takes it the same way. Her words signaled the end of the discussion. Tomitake-san said one arm wasn't found in the incident. I thought that a murder by dismemberment had occurred, but I guess I was wrong. Now Mion says goodbye to him, tells him not to wash off the felt tip pen on his face until he gets home because that's the rules of his penalty. And she's laughing. They're still having fun. He doesn't know what they've drawn on his face. I'm sure it's probably something vulgar, which is he's gonna have to go home and see his parents now, so I guess that's embarrassing. Mion, laughing, having a good time, doesn't seem to be at all disturbed by the conversation they just had about the dam construction site. The fact that he just asked her if there'd been any murders, and she'd said no. Upon arriving home, I ran straight into my mom, embarrassing myself yet again. The mood I'd come home to was already on edge. Also, we get another scene where he comes home to his family, with his face all covered in sketchy doodles. And it seems like his dad has got creative block of some kind, and he acts in a strange mood when that happens. His mum says, "Welcome home, Keiichi. Dad's in a bit of a rut right now, so don't bother him, okay?" His dad has a deadline for creating an art project. Dad's paintings feed our entire family. If he runs out of ideas, then that's the end of the Maybaras. But we've never gone hungry before. Could it be that my dad is a master painter? Keiichi suggests it would be easier to get an idea taking a walk outside rather than wandering around the house. But apparently the theme of the piece is in the household. So he wants to use the house as a motif. And we see his dad's bad mood because he starts shouting at Keiichi about his room being messy. Keiichi's mum suggests he goes for a walk or something because there's still some time before dinner, and with his dad being in a bad mood, it's probably better to be out of the house. It seems like Keiichi and his mum are used to his dad getting like this when he's struggling to have an idea and he's got a deadline, but his mood will improve and he will start humming as soon as he's got an idea. But now Keiichi's gone for a walk and he doesn't really know where to go. He gets on his bike, but even on his bike it would take him about an hour to get to the nearest town that has a bookstore, so he can't go and just read. And he says that the roads at night here in Hinamizawa creep him out, which is pretty normal for a city person who's out in the boonies, doesn't want to ride around on his bike at night. And he definitely doesn't want Mion or Satoko to find out that he does find the roads creepy at night, because they'd probably do something awful to him. But of course he remembers that Rena is probably still at the dam construction site, working on excavating Kenta-kun. So deciding that it wouldn't be bad to have her owe him a favour, he decides to go and help her. He also wonders if Tomitake-san might be there, and he's curious to see him because at the moment he seems like the only person with information about the murder, which of course Keiichi has questions about. He admits that that's his real intention in going there rather than to help Rena. And so we get to see all of these photos of garbage again. But he spots Rena struggling on top of the slope of the garbage pile. It looked like Kenta-kun was lodged in there pretty firmly. It didn't look like Rena would be able to excavate him by herself. Now he's noticed that Tomitake-san isn't there, so he just heads on to help Rena. And Rena is delighted to see that Keiichi's come. So he jokes with her. He says, "I received a signal for emergency assistance at the accident site. Where is the injured party?" Now, Rena looks horrified and says, "Accident?" But of course he reveals he was just talking about Colonel Sanders, who's been buried alive in the trash pile. "Oh, that, you scared me." Did it scare her that he referred to it as the accident site because she knows more than she let on about the whole murder thing and thought he was talking about that? And he was just messing around. But he's quickly cheers her up by saying that he's come to help her out. And he says, "If I don't see Rena blush at least once a day, then I'm not getting my daily required nutritional intake." He gets embarrassed and says he was just kidding about being there to help her. And now she gets confused. And he decides, I guess, best to just actually take action and start helping her rather than discussing whether or not that's why he's there. He takes a look and sees that Kenta-kun is buried in deep, sideways, surrounded by boards and other construction materials. According to Rena, it wasn't like this yesterday. Has more stuff been added? It seems as though another illegal dumper came yesterday, dumped again, and now he's buried like this. So are people coming every single day to dump things here? Is it illegal though? Maybe that's what the villagers agreed with the government that their village could be used for in place of them having the dam. Maybe they're letting some shady people dump some shady things in the old dam construction site or something like that. Maybe there's some organised crime thing going on and they've agreed to let their village be used in that way in return for them not finishing the dam. That's just my speculation. Now they're talking about how Rena shouldn't be able to move all this stuff with her scrawny arms, but she thinks it's worth trying anyway because Colonel Sanders is so cute. And she mentions that the Colonel Sanders in front of the KFC in their nearby town has a chain on it so she wouldn't be able to steal it. So clearly she's checked. She really likes Kenta-kun. Now Keiichi says that he wants to try and get the Kenta-kun out today because the more days they waste, the more likely more illegal dumping would occur and he'll be buried even deeper. Flying objects drew beautiful arcs across the twilight sky, one after another. It's a pretty poetic way to describe rooting through garbage for a Kentucky Fried Chicken statue. Lumber, timber, plywood. But no matter how much he threw out, there was still more. He could see Colonel Sanders right there, and after grandstanding like that in front of Rena, he felt frantic because of how little he had progressed. He realizes he would be able to do a much better job if he had an axe or a saw. Rena's worried about him now because he's so sweaty. She tells him he doesn't have to try so hard. He tells her he's doing it for her, which of course makes her as flustered as she ever gets. Now he's taking a break and Rena's wiping the sweat off of his forehead with her handkerchief, which he says feels pretty nice. Now she tells him to wait there for a minute because she can run back to her house and bring him some barley tea. The cries of the Higurashi gently cooled the air. But it seems he discovered something earlier, that he was waiting for Rena to leave so he could take a look at it. What was it? There was a garbage pile of magazines and newspapers bound up in twine. There were bound stacks of not so reputable tabloids. They were stacked chronologically, going back quite a few years. And so he's looking for a news report about the incident Tomitake referred to. thinking that it would undoubtedly be in the papers. So I'm wondering if the tip at the end of day 2, where we got to see that newspaper article about the murder, maybe that was a hint at this scene here, and this is going to be where he finds that newspaper that we got to read at the end of day 2, where it had all those blocked out names and dates. It says, "These are troubled times. There's no end to these sickening incidents. There's a large part of society drawn in by these incidents as well, so it had to be recorded somewhere." I mean, that's a weird way to talk about how a murder would definitely be in the newspapers. I mean, you'd assume that it would because it's in the public interest. But the way that he says that, "These are troubled times, there's no end to these sickening incidents." I mean, is this like an alternate version of Japan in 1983 and there's a lot of weird stuff going on? There's a large part of society drawn in by these incidents as well. Like, there are people who are really interested in murders and... I don't know, it just seems like a weird way to talk about it. Is this hinting that the reality that this takes place in isn't the normal year of 1983 from our own history, or, you know, it's a time when all kinds of weird things are going on. Now, since Keiichi's only going off of what Tomitake said, and all he said was that it was a grisly incident and they hadn't found one of the arms, he doesn't know when it happened. We know from the tip we saw on day 2 that it happened in 1979, but Keiichi doesn't know that yet. And he's feeling a bit shifty going through these old newspapers because Rena could come back at any moment, and the way that Rena and Mion had denied knowing anything made him suspicious, and he feels like if they caught him looking for information about that, it would be bad in some way. And now we see in block capitals, "Hinamizawa dam worker lynching, murder by dismemberment," with all those exclamation points showing that it does indeed come from one of those tabloid style papers. The featured article was in the back, and it seemed that there was a photograph in the coloured pages at the front. The pages of the featured article were stuck together and weren't easy to open. Rena could return at any moment. Feeling rushed, he gave up and opened the photograph page. The police investigators were carrying a body bag, and newspaper reporters were all bathing it in camera flashes. The image was blurry and hard to understand, but I could definitely make out the headlines. "A tragic nightmare at the Hinamizawa construction site. Lynching and murder/dismemberment. The victim was the site foreman. He had assaulted his assailants daily with an explosive backlash from his daily actions. It's a horrible image to see the site foreman as..." And so while he can't really make out too much from this old newspaper, he knows now that this incident Tomitake-san had hinted at definitely happened. It seemed the details were on the next page. He turned the page without pausing. On it was, okay, now the screen's gone weird. The assailants butchered the victim's body with hatchets and pickaxes, then used an axe to split the cadaver into 6 pieces, the head, arms, legs and torso. I could understand just from the headline that it was just too terrible an incident. Normally, a lynching is just assault and murder, right? Dismemberment with hatchets and pickaxes, that wasn't a lynching. It was a merciless killing to the letter, a brutal murder, done by a group of people. With hatchets, with pickaxes, with an axe. And now we have an axe sound. And I guess while Keiichi was thinking about those horrible things and getting himself suitably creeped out, Rena came back and she was holding an axe. Rena dropped the axe she was holding onto the grass after being startled by his voice. And she says that He'd mentioned earlier that it would help if he had an axe, so she brought one for him from the shed at her house. But now I think Keiichi-kun is a little bit too worn out and flustered to want to continue trying to dig out Kenta-kun, and it's starting to get dark. He says, "It doesn't look like we can break that last beam without an axe. You brought it after all. I'll have to borrow it tomorrow. Is that all right?" And he asks her why she looks so sad, considering that tomorrow they'll be digging out Colonel Sanders. And that cheers her up again. She really wants to take Colonel Sanders home soon. So she did also bring the barley tea, and he drinks that. And then they start to head home, with Keiichi feeling quite guilty about the newspaper wrapped up in his jacket. Now, just as with the previous 2 days that we've played through, we get 2 new tips at the end of this one. The first one is called the Hinamizawa Dam Project. October 1975. Okay, so I don't know if this is coming from an article that Keiichi gets to see, or whether this is just information for us. With the one that we saw the day before, where we had that newspaper article about the incident, the murder, it seems that Keiichi didn't see that at the end of day 2. He's only just found a newspaper at the end of day 3. And we don't know if that has the same information in it as we were shown in that. So this might be information just for the player. In accordance with the Prime Minister's Bulletin number, and once again we see something blacked out, Hinamizawa's Electrical Development Master Plan was announced. The vast scope of the projected Hinamizawa Dam will have an incredibly heavy impact on the village of Hinamizawa. The flooded area caused by the Hinamizawa Dam would include the 5 areas of Hinamizawa: Takatsudo, Kiyotsu, Matsumoto, and Yagachi. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of these Japanese words. I'm really sorry. I don't speak Japanese. I usually can say the names of characters and stuff where I've heard them in animes before, but in this case, I'm just trying to read them. The submerged area includes 291 houses, population 1,251, 1 elementary school, 1 middle school, 1 post office, an agricultural cooperative, a forestry department lumber yard, which I guess is where the school is now, 5 shrines, 2 temples, and 1 fishery. So they got a lot of shrines and temples compared with other things. There are 5 areas of Hinamizawa, and they, I guess, each have their own shrine. There are 2 temples. They don't really seem to have any shops or anything like that, though. All of these communal, cultural, agricultural areas and places of worship will be indefinitely submerged at the bottom of the artificial lake basin. Forsaking the hundreds of years our ancestors poured their blood and sweat into this fertile, resource-rich land is just too painful to bear. Okay, so this seems to have been written from the perspective of the villagers. All the residents having homes that were to be submerged banded together and created the Onigafuchi Defense Alliance. The dam project was halted and petitions to alter the plan were circulated. The citizens sought peaceful negotiations, but the government and its puppet company, which again we don't see the name of, openly refused. Performing unspeakable heinous acts, they quashed the democratic actions of the villagers. Are they like the Yakuza or something? There's a puppet company and we don't know what these unspeakable heinous acts are, but Mion alluded to something like that earlier. The continuation of that frightening Hinamizawa dam construction project is still stalled as of today. The villagers understand that the stalling was caused by their sublime power through unity, and they understand that this fearsome plan has not yet been fully withdrawn. Okay, so this was from 1975, and the murder was in 1979. So it seems like they managed to stall the project, but then 4 years later it started up again somehow because there was an overseer who was murdered, and the Onigafuchi Defense Alliance had been dissolved after it did its part, but the feelings of unity it garnered have not yet been extinguished. As long as that passion resides in the hearts of the residents, they'll be able to confront whomever next decides to sink their homes into a lake basin. Oh, and we do actually get a name here. So the committee chairman was Kiichiro Kimiyoshi. I wonder if that's a character we're going to see at some point, or whether it's just a name for somebody from the history of this setting that isn't relevant. And here we have the special tabloid report, which I guess is what Keiichi found at the garbage dumping place. Okay, yeah, so this is written in a completely different style from the clip that we saw after day 2, where it's the more tabloidy report of the news. I guess the previous one was more like a local newspaper or something. And now it started to play creepy music. In X month of X day in XX Prefecture at the Hinamizawa Dam construction worksite in Shishibone City, a bone-chillingly gruesome murder/dismemberment. Even though this case is shock to the archipelago, the police will give no details on the case. Exactly what happened at the Hinamizawa Dam? They probably didn't mean to kill him at first, but as the victim resisted by swinging around a shovel, the rest of the perpetrators armed themselves in return, and it quickly escalated to homicide. So said the aforementioned Investigator A. After this bloody tragedy was over, they were left with a body which nobody thought was alive. San had tormented the suspects daily with his rough behaviour. At first it was meant to be payback. All the perpetrators were horrified by their deed, and one even turned himself into the police. It was the de facto leader of this group, who suggested hiding the body. Reluctantly at first, they soon began to think they did not wish to be caught. The construction site had numerous places to hide the body with 6 people. They were originally supposed to hide the body and leave the area, but the de facto leader feared that the consciences of the other 5 wouldn't be able to bear the burden, and came up with a horrifying method to keep them from turning him into the police. He devised the heinous method of splitting up the body among them and making each of them responsible for hiding a piece. He'd turned a simple manslaughter into a gruesome dismemberment and forcibly involved each perpetrator in order to create a sense of unity between them. Each one participated. But what does this mean? Person A spoke out reluctantly. Had ordered each and every one of them to dissect a piece for themselves. They were hesitant at first, but nobody refused. In for a penny, in for a pound was what it meant. Thus, an unimaginable, bloody ceremony began. The perpetrators wept and vomited as they performed the gruesome task. There was one person who stubbornly refused, but threatened them, saying nothing would change if someone else ended up dead, and he gave up in his objections. But Blank's plan collapsed in the span of one night. With 3 exes, who had refused to dissect the corpse up until the last moment, had broken down into tears at the hospital where he was being treated for an injury sustained during the scuffle, and confessed. So this ties up with what we saw in the other report. The criminals were arrested one after the other, but the de facto leader, Blank's whereabouts, are still unknown. Also, the right arm hidden by has yet to be found. And so that ties in with what Tomitake-san said. Despite an ongoing search, this horrible individual has so far managed to elude law enforcement. What could the police be doing? It appears that had said he was going to throw the body, right arm, into the marsh. Blank's car was discovered abandoned near the marsh, but there were no clues to his whereabouts. Didn't trust his companions. One cannot deny the possibility that he had expected his companions to confess to the police and used his car as a decoy. Of course, I doubt that theory. Since he has no car, one would expect him to have a limited area to which he could have escaped to. But within the station, there were rumours going around that he had accidentally slipped and drowned in the marsh when he went to throw away the body. To the locals, that marsh is believed to be bottomless. It's known as Onigafuchi, the Ogre's Abyss, and it's said that the bottom of the marsh is connected to the hellish world of demons. The atrocious demon from hell that was blank. Could it be that he'd returned to hell through the marsh? The Zijin dragon, bringer of luck and fortune, prosperous future, ladies leaping into your arms, business success, promotions, ambition, protection from harm. Not just with pachinko and horse races, but business and even love. Guaranteed all your money back. Okay, so when it switched to this commercial, which I guess came after whatever it was that we were just reading, part of the newspaper article, the music also changed to this kind of wacky music it usually plays when the kids are playing games and stuff. It was kind of weird. And it's selling the Zijin Dragon Bracelet DX One Piece for 27,800 yen. Okay, so there was quite a lot to unpack, especially in that tabloid newspaper article. I mean, was that stuff about the marsh being a bottomless marsh that leads to hell, and the people of the village believe that? Was that kind of the tabloid just being, you know, like they are, saying crazy stuff as if it's fact? Or is that the kind of thing there is in this setting? As I said earlier, we don't actually know if this is set in the real world as we know it to have been in the 80s, or whether it's some kind of alternate reality where, of course, there still is Tokyo and things like that, but there is also marshes that lead to hell and things like that. I don't know what kind of setting this is, but where Keiichi was talking about how there had been a lot of unsettling incidents and things like that, I don't know what it's telling us about the setting, whether they're just humouring the superstitions of the locals who talk about their marsh being full of a gateway to hell and being bottomless, or whether that's the kind of thing that it's normal to believe in this story. But I have to say, I'm definitely enjoying this a lot more now. We're getting into the mystery a bit more, starting to see some more sinister stuff, some more hints that there are things we're supposed to be trying to figure out, or at least gather the clues for, within this visual novel. So this was the longest chapter reading so far, but I'm going to go and edit it down now, so hopefully I can make it as streamlined as possible for you guys. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again for the next chapter.